I like evidence. Stories are great. They teach us a lot about the behaviors of the creatures themselves, but so do footprint casts. And what I'm going to show you today is an overview of hand cast evidence. Now, we call these things Bigfoot because back in 1958, when they were building this road in Northern California at Bluff Creek, one of these things walked across the road, basically, and oh, that's a Bigfoot. Let's call that thing Bigfoot. And actually, that's how the species itself got its sort of a common name here in the United States. If it walked across on its hands, we'd be calling these things big hands. If it sat and scooted across the ground on its butt, guess what we'd be calling it? I like Bigfoot, and I cannot lie. So we're going to take a look at some of the hand cast evidence that's been accumulated over the years. Because think about it, you're a biped, just like Sasquatches. You walk on two legs. Sometimes your hands come in contact with the ground. Hands are extremely useful. I have two that I use all the time for a wide variety of things, and Sasquatches are no different. But first, let's look at the feet. We're going to get back to the hands in a minute, but the whole point of this is that there's differences between Sasquatch feet and human feet. On the right here is a beautiful example of a Sasquatch footprint. On the left is a beautiful example of my friend Scott's footprint. Scott Taylor, by the way, a Bigfoot researcher from Washington State. I pulled this cast at the LB track site. The LB tracks were fake. Somebody planted them and tried to fool me, specifically the BFRO, and when they didn't answer, they came after me. Oh, Cliff thinks he's so smart, let's go boo, right? Well, it turns out I saw right through it. It had me for a moment or two because it's really exciting when you're casting prints, but it didn't take very long to figure out that that whole thing was bunk. Because there's really, well, and there were fake stompers, but it turns out Scott was there, and he was walking around, and he left his own footprints there, and I cast them. Interestingly, some of the other Bigfoot researchers that showed up thought that these were juvenile Sasquatch footprints. Interestingly. But there's so many characteristics here that easily tell it apart. Like the length, okay, that's I don't know, it's 15 or 16 inches if I remember right. Scott's is smaller, it's like 10 or 11 inches. Okay, so size, you know, sometimes plays a role, but not always, because every 8-foot Sasquatch starts off as a 2.5-footer and grows through all the stages. But the width is where we get, and especially when we talk about the proportions of length to width. Sasquatch footprints are a lot wider than human prints, especially when humans grow big and tall. Take Shaquille O'Neal, for example. If I remember right, and any basketball aficionados here, feel free to correct me, but I believe Shaq is about 7 foot 2 inches tall. His feet are about 14.5 inches long, the same length as a Patterson-Gimlin film subject's feet. However, Patty, the Bigfoot, her feet are about 1/3 wider than Shaq. So again, it's the proportions that you can tell the difference here. Toe splay. Look at Scott's toes here. Nice and tight in a curl. This little pinky toe is almost always curled in because Scott habitually wears shoes. Look at that pinky toe there. Shoom, goes off that way. The other toes are there, 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 and there. So toe splay is a big deal. Ball length, which is this part of the foot here, is, if you caught my presentation last night, you know that that is the skin that overlies the metatarsals. The heel width, yeah, Sasquatch heels are generally wider, and of course the flexibility, which we see very well in this cast. There's a big bend right here and all the wiggliness and bendiness of the toes. Then I have the reconstructions here. There's Scott, and there's always another Bigfoot footprint cast. This is the original. A couple of you were lucky enough to buy this replica from me, by the way, but this is the original cast. And of course, there's a human recreation, well, we know what the bones look like, and there's a Sasquatch inferred morphology of the bones underneath the foot. So they're different, and you would expect their hands to be different too. And sure enough, they are. Most things about Bigfoots are different because they are not humans. There's a very vocal population in the Bigfoot community that's always screaming about how these things are humans. They are not humans. They are probably of the human lineage, They are probably hominins, which is a fancy word for things on the human lineage. But they are not humans, no matter how human-like some of their behaviors might be. Their morphology clearly tells it. Let's look at this real fast. This is a human hand. I'm going to teach you a new word here, especially for those people who participated in my talk last night. I talked about metatarsals last night. These guys here, the bones that would correspond to the metatarsals, if this was a foot, the word is metacarpals, with a C, not a T. Okay, just so you know. Nothing wrong with learning something, that's why we're all here. Now, I'll take questions perhaps later, I'm sorry though. And anybody who wants to heckle me, I'll go ahead and deal with you too. Because I have about 350 friends here with me today. And you guys are Texans, you're all packing, I know you are. Texas is the only place I go that people applaud guns. I love you guys. You're so funny. Anyway, human hand on the right, Sasquatch inferred morphology on the left. And this inferred morphology is based on quite a few handprints. Dr. Meldrum did this. I'm not qualified to do that. I know what I'm good at, and I don't know anatomy like someone with a PhD in anatomy does. You know, I've never dissected human hands like Jeff has. I've never dissected chimpanzee hands like Jeff has. So I defer to him. Luckily, Jeff's on my team and vice versa. We work well together and we're in communication quite a bit about our discoveries and findings and that sort of thing. But anyway, you see a lot of the bones in here. They're kind of just different in general, different proportions. And also, you notice that the fingers kind of look a little shorter. That's because, but look, these are, phalanges here, these bones here. The phalanges look about the same, but the skin doesn't go down quite as far. That's called webbing, by the way. So when you read Bigfoot books, like I hope you all do, I hope that you don't all learn about Bigfoot stuff from YouTube. I hope you actually take the time to read books, because there's information that is not available elsewhere. Beep, beep. Anyway, this is called webbing. You have webbing as well. But I remember back 20 years ago or more when I was first delving into the Bigfoot books and I ran across references to the webbing. I thought, well, I mean, does that mean they're good swimmers? Or I mean, what's going on there, you know? But really, all it is the skin between your bones here. Like there's webbing there. You can see where the skin goes down to about here, between the bones. That's webbing. You have it too. So anyway, if you hear or read about the webbing in your finger, don't get too concerned about, you know, frog-like appendages and that sort of thing. Now, I'm going to start here because to my knowledge, this is the very first documentation of handprint evidence in Bigfoot land where we all live. This is from 1962 from Fort Bragg, California. It's on the coast, it's on the Mendocino coast in central California. So what happened, there was a sighting, somebody saw one of these things walking, it came up, and the Sasquatch slapped the outside of a building, as they are apt to do, and left this handprint here. Now this is a tracing of the handprint. There's no photograph of it, there's no cast obviously, it's a mark on a wall. But the police officers who investigated this traced the hands, and they were kind enough to include measurements 11.5 inches from the base of the palm to the tip of the middle finger. One of the officers traced his own hand against it. You can kind of see how big that is. And just look at the general shape. I mentioned this in my presentation last night, that we can get all tied down into metrics. In other words, the measurements in feet and hand and stuff. But as human beings, we just kind of can look at something and kind of get a sense of the differences and similarities. And you can look here, look at the difference between the human hand and the Sasquatch hand. Short, stubby fingers on the Bigfoot hand versus the human. The thumb looks a little wonky as well, and we're going to get to that. But let's continue cruising through the evidence to see what we see. The next hand casts that I'm aware of are the 1970 Bossberg prints from Washington. These are associated with a well-known hoaxer named Ivan Marks. I was recently heavily criticized in print about my defense of the Ivan Marks handprint because Ivan Marks is a well-known hoaxer. However, remember, Ivan Marks is the one that gave us the cripplefoot footprints, one of the pillars of Bigfooting. And just because Ivan got involved in hoaxing and faking faking films later does not mean that a couple of the things in the data set might actually be real. I try not to judge on the person's reputation, but on the evidence that they produce. And okay, even if this isn't real, it has some very interesting characteristics. We're gonna get back to that in a minute. But there's two of these prints. I only own one myself, and this is a photograph of my copy. It's a 1/2 inch grid, by the way. It kind of looks like a big baseball mitt, maybe it is, although these bend forward into the ground, be really hard to do. It's a close-up of one of the fingers, you can see the bend there. Now, is it real or is it not? At first, I said, you know what, Ivan Marx's name is on it? Yeah, I just can't accept it. But a recent discovery sheds new light on this. And I will get to that in a little while later in the presentation here. I think you're going to be fascinated by this, because I certainly was. And it might actually mean this is real, despite our Ivan Marx's association. See, because right around this time, he took a film of a dude in a suit and said, oh, this is the cripplefoot critter. Oh, let me back up. The cripplefoot footprints, like I mentioned, Bossburg, Washington, were found just a few months before this. Ivan Marx later says that he found handprints. There's the handprints in the ground. There's quite a few more than this, by the way. And then he came up with a film a little while later, and Peter Byrne went and busted that as a hoax. He found the person in the suit, he found the location, the whole deal. Therefore, well, all these things must be fake too, right? Well, we're gonna get back to that, because you need to look at the evidence beyond just the person, because when sometimes when somebody gets all this attention for, you know, the cripplefoot footprints and that sort of thing, maybe they need to keep that going. Maybe that attention is kind of a drug in itself they become addicted to. Attention, like money or fame or any opioids, whatever, they're all addictive, and they all end up in they put you in bad spots eventually. The 70s were really quiet. I'm not aware of any other handprint evidence from the 70s. And then we get to 1982. In June of 1982, Paul Freeman pulled this cast out of an elk wallow in the middle of a line of Sasquatch footprints. It's a knuckle print, if you're having trouble interpreting what you're looking at. You can see finger, 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 thumb. The thumb's super interesting. There's a different angle of it. Finger, 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 thumb. Looks real wide, but most likely, it's not that wide, it just moved. I said this last night, and I said there's going to be a test today. Who remembers what I asked you to memorize about footprints? How about footprints are not the shape of the foot. They're the shape of the damage done to the ground by the foot. Handprints are also the same case. So if you put your hand in the ground, or thumb in the ground, rather, and move it, it'll look real wide. That's what happened here. We know, by the way, the angle of the thumb, because this cast is very, very special because of this right here. Thumbnail. That thumbnail proved to be very, very important. And again, we'll get back to that after we continue cruising down Handprint Avenue here. The same year, 1982, Bob Titmus, the guy who cast those 10 tracks at the Patterson-Gimlin film site in a row that I was talking about last night, he was in Bluff Creek, the area. He went there for about a month every year in October and camped the entire time because most of the Bigfoot activity in the 60s happened at Bluff Creek in October. And it turns out if you go to the same spots the same time of year, the Bigfoots are usually back in that general area for whatever reason. You know, Bigfoot bingo or whatever they're doing, hanging out in like Bluff Creek, they're back at that spot. And sure enough, up on Laird Meadow, which is a few miles up the hill from Bluff Creek itself, Louse Camp area, if you've ever been in there, on the slopes of Onion Mountain, he found a pair of Sasquatch footprint tracks that led like a mile or two and led to this pond. This pond is still there today. I took this photograph in 2015. And in it, the Sasquatch went in the pond, there were footprints in the bottom of it, and went over to the side and was started scraping around in the mud on the other side and left handprints. It's pretty interesting. A lot of scrape marks here. You can kind of count the fingers. It's a little tough, but they're all there. 1, 2, 3, 4. But you know what? It lifted his hands and did it several times. It doesn't have 6 or 7 or 8 fingers because that's not the shape of the hand. That's the shape of the damage done to the ground by the hand. Over here on the side, you see a thumb. Real interesting. And you gotta take your hat off to Bob Titmus, man, because He saw this underwater in the pond. And he called his buddies from the Bay Area group down in San Francisco who met him, and they drained the pond together. They got a pump up there. There's photographs of this. You can check it out online. They drained the pond until it was low enough to get in there and cast the handprint. Bob Titmus, I can tell you. 1986. This hand cast came out of the Blue Mountains. This is the one that we used, or Dr. Meldrum used earlier for the recreation, the inferred morphology of the hand. It is huge. It is so hard. I mean, that's almost life size. I mean, I'm joking, but it is big. Like, I'm not, let's see, it's hard to read here, the numbers, but remember, this is half an inch grid. So pardon me, I'm going to practice my counting skills. I'm very good at counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I don't know, I'm guessing 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I don't know, that's like 15, 16 inches. It's big, it's really big. I've got all my casts and trays and stuff in my garage. It takes up a whole tray. I can usually put 2 or 3 footprints in one tray. It's giant. But again, stumpy little fingers, kind of a wonky little thumb. And this one, if you look close enough, and more importantly, feel the cast, you can feel the flexion creases. Those are the wrinkles in your skin, like your lifeline and your love line and all this sort of stuff. You can see and feel some of those things in this area. In 1992, these guys were tracking a Bigfoot. They came to a logging landing, and this hand cast was in the logging landing in some soft soil where the thing was moving logs around or something. This is Vance Orchard, a newspaper guy. He's passed on now, but he documented a lot of the Blue Mountain evidence, and he cast this. There's a footprint associated with it. I call it the Mickey Mouse print because it reminds me of Mickey Mouse's gloves. But from the side, you can see with one finger impressed a lot more deeply. It's not the best cast in the world, but it does conform to what we expect Sasquatch hands to be. This is 1992 from Squaw Springs, not far away from this other spot, the previous cast. You see these lines and stuff on here? Well, that's because the guy who got this, Wes Summerlin, I've never met the man, but I'm good friends with his son and his grandson. In fact, 20, 30 minutes ago, I got a text from his grandson. Wes was a great Bigfoot tracker. He got a lot of footprint cast evidence from the Blue Mountains, and he'd hang them up on his wall and stuff. But his wife started to complain because, oh, they're so bumpy and ugly. So he would wash them over with plaster to get rid of all the bumps and stuff for his wife. The things we do for love. But the general morphology is still there. We lost some of the detail. Who knows, there could have been dramatic lithics on this. We'll never know. But looking at it from the side, look at these fingers here. Nice curves to them. Each finger's a little bit different. I think it's legitimate. Here's another cast from 1994, Biscuit Ridge, Washington. I had this cast over there for sale as well. Somebody got it first night, in the first 20 minutes. It's an excellent cast, but look at the fingers here, like they're all cut off. What's up with that, you know? Well, what's up with that is the impressions where the fingers were sort of filling in with the sand and soil that they were made in. Yeah, okay, well that happens. But the thumb sure looks weird. Look at that palm, it's really nice. You can kind of see the shape of it from the side. Kind of a lack of thinner pad. That's like the drumstick-like thing you have at the bottom of your thumb. That piece of meat, that chunk of a muscle. The neat thing about this one, by the way, is that there were footprints associated with it. This is one of the only ones, I think it actually is the only one, except for maybe Cripplefoot, that has footprints and the hand cast associated with the same animal. Which is interesting, because that can give us more information, like hand-to-foot ratios. And also, if you listened to my thing last night, my presentation last night about the bendiness of the foot, look at that thing. Holy smokes. And all of these, you can see the mid-tarsal break in here, and this cast, a little bit here and not so much here. But look at the toes, and the various positions of the toes. Very, very bendy feet. Here's another cast from the Blues. This needs a little bit of explanation because those fingers, you see how there's like a little constriction in this area and this area in the fingers? Paul Freeman got this print. This whole thing looks kind of wonky to me. Paul Freeman got this print. And if you look closely, you see how smooth this is and smooth that? Something's up with that. Well, as it turns out, you remember that previous print that I showed you where the fingers kind of caved in upon themselves and made it look short and stumpy, and that happened in this cast as well. But Paul Freeman made the mistake of putting his own fingers in to finish the finger impressions. Which is part of the reason Paul gets such a bad rap about faking stuff, because he did do that, he admitted that. And there's a couple other strange things in a couple of the data set, but again, this cast conforms in every way to the other ones, except for those fingertips that Paul himself put in there. What I want you to draw your attention to here is the size of the palm. It's huge. Let's see if I can read these numbers over here. From this spot right here, what is that? That's 1, 2, 3. That's this is 4, 5 inches right there. That's fifth, and this is a foot, so that's, I don't know, 13 minus 5. What is it? 8 inches. An 8-inch palm. Look at your own palm. It's nowhere near 8 inches. Sorry, I thought I heard a Bigfoot whistle from the. This is an interesting cast from New Mexico. It's not a cast, I'm sorry, impression from New Mexico. Basically, people lived in this single wide over here on the Mescalero Reservation. And a Bigfoot came up one night and was looking in their windows and doing, Bigfoot stuff, causing mischief. And it touched their screen. And it kind of left this impression here. Now, when I saw this, it looks like a giant mitten it was wearing. But when you look at it from a different angle, you can see the finger scrapes across the screen itself. This right here is Dennis Foll, an excellent Bigfoot researcher and a good friend of mine from Colorado. That's him showing how high that screen was. Turns out Dennis's job at this time was replacing screen doors. So what he did is he talked to the witness who owns the single wide there, and he offered to put in a new window if he could have the old one. And this is still in the possession of Dennis. So that's kind of cool. And of course, Dennis gave me full permission to use this. And if you go to my website, cliffbarackman.com, I have, as far as I know, the only footprint and impression database. Sighting reports are great, but Matt's already got that covered in the BFRO. My contribution is the footprint database. This is in there, and it has commentary from Dennis about it. So feel free to visit my website and check it out. Excuse me. Here's another handprint. It's hard to see, but it's there in the gravel. 5 fingers, and it's a gravel road. It's real tough. That's from Lake Cushman, Washington, up in the Olympic Peninsula. This is from the Bridges property outside of Chattahoochee, Florida. They have issues with Bigfoots on their property, stealing stuff and moving things around and scaring people, and they're basically a long-term witness. You might use the word habituator for that, but I don't like that term. You can't habituate a Sasquatch. You just can't. But you can be a long-term witness once they figure out your routine and kind of let their guard down a bit. You live in a spot where they wander around a little, like often, a couple times a year, you might see them or find tracks or find handprints on your glass screen one morning when you wake up after hearing noises on the porch. Now, when they called the Bigfoot researcher folks in the neighborhood over who've been working with these people, and they said, oh my gosh, it's a handprint. Look, you see the fingers? You see the thumb over here on the side? There's grease all over in here and stuff. And they took a video of it, and they were getting ready to take photographs of it. So what we gotta do, we gotta take photographs of this. This is great data, and it's great evidence. And so they got the Windex out because they were gonna clean the inside to make sure there are no smudges so they get a real good shot of that handprint on the outside of their screen door. And of course, they take the Windex and wipe across, and the handprint was on the inside. Now we all go, oh, but think about that for a minute. It opened the door. It opened the door and slid its hand on the inside. For all of you living in rural areas, you gonna leave your doors unlocked anymore? Now over here on the right-hand side, I included this because there's something I want to point out about finding Bigfoot. I said this last night. By and large, television is a shallow, superficial medium. They only have so much time, 43 and a half minutes of television airtime to show you whatever we do. And we kind of pack a lot into the episodes. They can't put information at the level I'm giving it to you into a show. Because by and large, America doesn't care. You guys do. That's why I'm invited to speak to you. But most Americans just, they don't watch the show like for information and learning about Bigfoot so much. They watch the show to watch four weirdos look for an animal that doesn't exist. That's the truth, and I get that. We know different. But once we're done filming the segments where we interview the witness, and once we're done with our interviews and all that sort of stuff, they let me loose. Because I want more information. And I'm not going to squander this opportunity to travel the world and study Bigfoots without coming back with something like this information. So after we got finished with the examination and witness interrogation and stuff, if you want to call it that, they said, okay, Cliff, go. And they always let me do this. I go and I take meticulous notes because I know we only have 20 minutes or so until I need to pack up. This is a drawing of the screen door. There's the handle there. It shows you the type of handle. It shows the dimensions. And basically through this, I found out that, let me look at my numbers here. From the tip of the fingers to the base of the palm there, it's 11 inches. Look at your own. It's not 11 inches. Not even close. It's probably more like 7. So that's 11 inches. Now, it didn't slide so much because if you look at it, you can see the sliding that's on the screen itself. It's not an 11-inch slide. The hand touched it. It's 11 inches because you can tell a greasy palm slide when you look at it. Anyway, I thought I'd share that with you, just to prove, in case you had any doubt at all, that I am indeed a nerd. Port Angeles, Washington. I've been working with these long-term witnesses up in Port Angeles there in Washington. And this is something that they gathered. They think it's a handprint, and they might be right. This is a tarp, thin plastic tarp covering their compost pile out back. One morning they heard some weird noises, so they walked around in the morning to see what was up, and they got this. They think that these are finger impressions and a palm, and maybe they're right. Maybe not, but maybe they're right. It still needs to be recorded and documented. So I did. This is from 2014 in Kentucky. An excellent Bigfoot researcher I'm good friends with named Tom Shea, who runs a blog. You should all check it out. I think it's Kentucky Bigfoot Researcher or something like that. His name is Thomas Shea. He has pulled these hand casts. I got an email from him yesterday. He's sending me one of the casts to make copies of. So I'm excited to get my eyes on those. These phenomenal hand casts were made after a freak snowstorm outside of Augusta, Georgia back in 2014 in February. Fantastic handprints. We'll look at those more closely in just a short while. This wonky looking thing, that's a picture of it in the ground. This is a picture of the cast. Came from Jackson County, Missouri. Doesn't look like much, and in fact, when I first saw it, I was thinking, that's probably an alligator print, until I looked more closely. Wait till we look at that more closely, you're gonna be stoked. Oh, that's the Californian in me coming out. Dude. Oh, there it is. Here's another one from Thomas Shea, back at Crypticon just a few weeks ago. Excuse me, in Kentucky. Lyle and I were together doing a gig over there. He showed up, I got him tickets because, you know, he lives in Kentucky, so he cruised down and showed me some of the things he's pulled recently. This is 2016, that's one hand cast. It sure looks similar to that other one, that Freeman cast, where the fingers caved in on itself. It's super interesting. This is that same long-term witness house. This happened on July 30th, 2017. The male in the family, I'll call him Bob, his name's not Bob, but I'll call him Bob. He was working in the computer room right there. Late one night, 1:30, 2 in the morning, his wife was asleep, and he heard a big pop, and like the room almost shook for a minute. This noise is so loud. He thought his wife had come in and like slammed the door behind her, so he turned around, door's open. His wife's nowhere in sight. So he gets up and he checks, his wife's in bed. And he's sleeping. So Bob says, honey, did you, and his wife says, leave me alone, I'm asleep. And he goes, okay, well, he didn't do anything. So he checked all the doors in the house, they were all locked, and the next morning, he got out, started looking around, particularly in the area of his office. And through some miracle, this caught his eye. Finger, 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 thumb. The location was on the third full slat over. 1, 2, 3. That is 7 foot 4 inches from there to the ground. Something banged the top of the building. Remember the Fort Bragg handprint that we started this whole deal with, right? Hit the outside of a building. On Friday, my wife Melissa and I were at the zoo here in Dallas. She used to work at the Pittsburgh Zoo. She made friends with a gorilla when she was there. It was her gorilla friend. And that gorilla named Hope was transferred to the Dallas Zoo. So we stopped by to say hi, basically. While we were there, they have a glass sort of enclosure or whatever, and the big old male silverback is coming and sitting down and putting his back to us, which is a sign of disrespect amongst primates like that. But at one point, we're just standing there, and one of the silverbacks just ran by and went boom on the glass that we're standing there. Ooh, Sasquatch behavior. Interesting. The congruency of all the available data is by far the best evidence for Bigfoot. I don't know when this one is taken, but it's a big one. This is in Dr. Jeff Meldrum's collection. He let me loose in his lab, a couple years ago when I visited. He had some work to do at his desk. He goes, yeah, I don't do what you want to do, Cliff. Take pictures, use them for however you want. So I did. It was like a kid in a candy store giggling like a schoolgirl the entire time as I photographed every specimen in his lab. This is that Tom Shea handprint that he shared with me a few weeks ago at Crypticon. And here's that one with the fingers kind of caving in. Look at the general shape. Look at the thumb position. Awfully similar. The congruency is really strong evidence. Here's that knuckle print from 1982. Here's my knuckle print. Finger, 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 thumb pad. If you put your knuckle down on the table or your knee in front of you, and make sure that the middle segments of your fingers are touching, and you touch your thumb down, you're gonna find that the fat pad on the tip of your thumb, opposite side of your nail, will be touching the table or your knee or whatever you're touching. But look over here. This is the middle segment of the finger. The side of the thumb is being impressed. We know that because not only is the thumbnail clearly evident in the cast, but the movement was in this direction. Their thumbs are not in the same position as ours. They are an entirely different species of animal than you and me. We can see that in these hand casts as well. Over here, the thumb, even though it's all the way off to the side there, is going directly into the ground, just like the other fingers are. And in the snow print, we see the same thing. This is on top of a trash dumpster. Apparently the Sasquatch visits the property occasionally and raids the trash can. I would too. The fingers impress into the snow, and it's black there because it's a black plastic top to the dumpster that you lift up and drop back down, Sometimes they're metal tops. This one is a black plastic one. Look at the thumb. Directly into the ground, and not the ground, the top of the dumpster. The same direction as the fingers. We just saw that here. We see that here. This is the best guess on what a Sasquatch hand kind of looks like. A woman named Sue Lindley, an artist, made this sculpture. Now this is a gorilla hand cast. This is from actually a gorilla. It's not the hand itself, it's a replica. Here's a human. Look at the thumb there, nice and short and squat. The thumb here is real long because we have what's called a precision grip. We can grab things and manipulate small objects. The Sasquatch thumb, in this case, look at that, it's going the same direction as the fingers. Now, there's a lot of sighting reports that have Sasquatches lifting things up, like fern stalks or a stick. And when they grab the thing, the whatever it is, the pole, all 5 fingers go around the same direction. That doesn't mean that sometimes the thumb's on the other side, because this thumb, even though it's over here to the side right now, can rotate up. And like if the thumb here just kind of went up, in line with the rest of the fingers, the tip would still be pointing the same direction as the rest of the fingers. You see what I'm saying there? Your thumb can move, so can theirs. There's a book that is published recently, and the guy spent an entire chapter on how these hand casts must be fake, because there's no way that an animal would be able to grip things with a thumb that's permanently stuck out to the side like that, and we know they pick things up. He fell victim to an inflexible human thinking. The hand is way more flexible than his thinking. All these wiggle, all these move. They are not permanently stuck in that position, just like your hand isn't permanently stuck in any position. When we look at the other evidence, we see the same trait. This thumb is slightly bent, looking directly at the camera, just like the fingers are. This thumb is slightly bent, just like the other fingers are, even though they're in slightly different positions. Now back here at the 82 Bluff Creek, the titmus thing, the thumb here is in upward position. Now, of course, that's not the shape of the hand, it's the shape of the damage on the ground by the hand of the thing. But still, it's parallel with those other fingers, just like I said that this thing can do. This could move up and be parallel and still bend the same directions as the other fingers. Which brings us to Ivan Marks again. Again, I was ready to write this off. It's probably nonsense. It was found at the same general time, the same general place as Ivan Marks' his very first fake film. He went on to fake a bunch of others. And these hands, okay, they kind of look like big catcher's mitts, and some people said, okay, well maybe they're baseball mitts. You know, you take the webbing off and you press them into the ground, and maybe that's what you have. But the thumb, even though it's off to the side, is pointing the same directions as the other fingers. That's interesting. Turns out, remember I said Peter Byrne busted that film hoax, right? Peter Byrne filmed a lot at Bossburg. He had that film for a long, long time, and if you saw my presentation, I had a cast on the table over there that I'm kind of lacking information for. It's the Pacific Northwest cast. Tom Cousineau and a guy named Gene from the Northeast, they collect things together. They bought Peter Byrne's films. They didn't know what they bought. They didn't know what was in it. They lent me the film, thinking maybe Cliff knows something about what's in the film, because we don't. They're more collectors than they are historians and researchers. Well, I started watching this 45-minute segment, and most of it's pretty boring, but then there were footprints in the ground, and I recognized them as the Cripplefoot footprints from the trash bin, or the trash dump that they started at in Bossburg, Washington. A few scenes later, there were these things, these handprints in this big area of sand. I said, man, those look an awful lot like the Bossburg handprints from Ivan Marks. And I started looking at them and say, wait a minute, look at the thumb. And look at the thumb there, it's way off to the side. This one's real close and tied in, but always parallel. That's interesting. See, here they are again. Oh, look, the thumbs are in different positions here. But then, off to the corner of the screen, and this has never been noticed before, knuckle prints. No one has ever said Ivan Marks had knuckle prints at the location. Not once in all the literature that's put out has this ever been mentioned. So I said, holy crap. I might have said something a little bit stronger, because I was really enthusiastic at that point. And I started looking at that knuckle print. So that looks kind of weird to me. So wait a minute, I'm a good counter. 1, 2, 3, for 5 digits impressed into the ground, all parallel with one another. Remember how your fingers or knuckles would impress into the ground if you did that? Your thumb would be off to the side with only the fat pad pressing into the ground. But no, not this one. All 5 digits pressed into the ground in a parallel fashion. Dr. Grover Krantz first analyzed handprints in 1972, if I remember. This is 2 years before. No one knew that Sasquatch hands, thumbs in particular, would do that. It wasn't until 1982 that this was actually verified by more evidence. But yet here we go, 1970. This overlooked data, this overlooked evidence is right there. And it's congruent with what we know about Sasquatch handprints now. I was criticized for defending Ivan Marx's handprints because he's a hoaxer. That's okay. I'm an evidence guy. The evidence is congruent years before it was analyzed by anyone. I think these might be legit based on that. You can criticize me too if you'd like, but at least do it based on the evidence. Now, apes use their hand in a variety of ways. Here we have a chimpanzee using their knuckles for locomotion because they're habitual quadrupeds. They usually walk on 4 legs, or 4 limbs. By the way, they walk on the middle segment of their knuckles, just like those knuckle prints from 1982. Interesting. Here's a gorilla crossing a stream, holding a tool to keep that gorilla steady as they cross the stream, because gorillas really don't like water. They don't like to go in the water. In fact, until just a few decades, like maybe 2 decades ago, they thought that any river is a natural barrier for gorilla populations and they don't cross the water. But now we know better, and sometimes they use tools to steady themselves. Here's an orangutan using his fingers to get some yummies inside that tube. And here's a group of chimpanzees using their hands for grooming one another, which is a very nice social activity for them. That's how they chill out after a long day of, chimp work. And over here, those weird naked apes called human beings use their hands for symbolic thought. This is some 35 or 40,000 years old. On the cave wall, they put paint in their mouth, blew it through grass tubes, kind of as a signature, we think, to the art that they also put on those same walls. These are artist signatures before there was writing. Sasquatches use their hands for a lot of things, but there's some things that we know they can't really use their hands for because of that thumb. That thumb over there. And we know they can't use it very much because they don't have a really pronounced thenar pad. That muscle at the base of your thumb that looks like a chicken leg bone. It's there, there's muscles there, but it's not really like yours and mine. They seem to lack the precision grip that we've developed. In fact, think about their hands. We know they have short, stubby fingers. They seem to lack a thinner pad to the development like we have. That means that their hand isn't used for fine precision manipulation, like picking up BBs off a table. It's used for things like ripping into logs. Power grips, in other words, not fine precision grips. But Bigfoots are wily things. They're awfully smart. They may even have some sort of language or proto-language. I know researchers that have heard them whispering to one another in that sort of grumbly, fast-paced thing they tend to do. They might have some level of symbolic thought, just like we do. Other apes have some level of symbolic thought, but I think Bigfoots probably go a little further than most. So you find strange artifacts in association with long-term witnesses sometimes that make it hard to really fathom the depth of what we're dealing with. Over here, by the way, this is one of my wife Melissa's friends from the Pittsburgh Zoo, Marithi. Marithi is holding some grass here, and I'd like to draw your attention that all 5 digits go around that grass in the same direction. Sasquatches would be expected to pick up grass sometimes. I forget where this came from, I'd have to check my notes, but this was found in association with some Sasquatch evidence. I don't know what they're doing though. It's pretty, not that pretty. And these guys here, these are really cool, and I was so strange to me, because like, oh, what are those things, right? Scott Taylor showed these to me back in maybe 2008 or something like that. He goes, Cliff, what do you think of this? I go, well, I don't know what that is. He unwrapped one. Inside each one of these grass packets that have been folded and woven on itself is a dead mouse. Yum. That's super interesting. But when Scott showed me that, I said, well, how do you know a Bigfoot did that? That's how I've never heard of that before. I don't know a Bigfoot did that, so I'm just gonna file that away in the that's interesting pile, but I'm not gonna write it off and I'm not gonna endorse it. Fine. Fast forward 10 years. Finding Bigfoot is filming in New Jersey on the other side of the continent. Spoke to a long-term witness there. She had seen Bigfoots on the property perhaps 3 or 4 times. They hear the noises, they get the house slaps, the whole 9 yards. The Bigfoots are around sometimes, not every day. You know, like 3 or maybe 2, 3, 4 times a year. Like normal long-term witnesses. And they say, yeah, and then like on the stump, you know, they leave food out for them sometimes and they get weird things back. Like the food's gone in the morning, but they get some like headless Barbie doll back or something like that. Some weird trash out in the woods. Which is a very common Bigfoot behavior, I might add. Not necessarily the Barbie doll part, but I do know like crappy like Nerf footballs have appeared. Marbles have appeared and things like that. One day, 3 or 4 grass-wrapped dead mice appear. That's 2 hits right there on opposite coasts, 10 years apart. I guarantee you the witnesses don't know each other. Maybe there's something going on there. I'm a little bit more convinced now. They might have symbolic thought of some way. They might be able to manipulate objects like this with their wonky thumb, but clearly they're not very good at it. Then again, if I had to wrap a dead mouse with grass, I probably wouldn't do a much better job because I'd want it to be over with. Look at the finger length. Nice and short and stubby for that power grip. But how short are the fingers? I wanted to find out and compare it to human hands. Now there's these things called indices. That's a plural word, more than one, for index. Okay? Now, an index is a way to measure bodies, basically. Like the most famous one for Bigfoot is the intermembral index. How long the arm is in relation, like a ratio, a fraction, to how long the leg is. Well, it turns out they do this for hands as well. And I wanted the finger length, so I looked up this sort of thing that anatomists care about. There's something called the finger length index, where you take the hand length, the tip of the finger to the base of the palm, and divide it by the palm length plus the palm breadth. Palm length, palm breadth. And that kind of gives you a proportion of how long the fingers are. I took 13 potential Sasquatch samples. The range of the finger length index was 0.67 to 0.91. That basically, for those of you not like super thrilled about math, means that that's 67% to about 91%, the length of the whole deal here, right? The length of the hand length there. And the average is about 76%, or 0.76. Now in humans, the finger length index ranges usually between 87 and 90. That's normal. And if you have short fingers, it's 80% to maybe 87%. And if you have below 80%, 0.8, that's abnormal, like something's not right. You have some sort of like genetic situation or like, you know, I don't know, something. Look at that average Sasquatch finger length. It's below, way outside of human range. Because they're not humans. They don't use their hand for the same reason we do. They use their hands for a lot of things, though. Remember this guy with the giant palm. What do we say, 11 inches or something? Maybe it's 10. Who knows? Real big, though. This gorilla here is clapping. For you field researchers out there, have you ever done a knock and got one back within 5 seconds? I have. I've had that happen on the Olympic Peninsula, the rainforest in Washington, where it rains over 150 inches a year. I can't find a stick that's not waterlogged to do knocking with, and I certainly can't find a tree that's not covered in 4 inches of moss to hit that waterlogged thing and get that nice sound that they get. Huh. Could they be clapping? Gorillas do. There's a well-known study, came out about 4 or 5 years ago, of lowland gorillas in Rwanda. And the researchers found that whenever they went into the swamp where this troop of gorillas lived, the females would clap to warn the others of the researchers' approach. All you field researchers out there, have you ever noticed you get unsolicited knocks when you enter an area? Have you ever noticed you get unsolicited knocks when you leave an area? Like if somebody else leaves and you stay behind? Well-known ape behavior, and they have the anatomy to make really loud knocks if they want. And of course, that doesn't mean that they don't hit sticks against trees. I've got about 2 reports that show that behavior. They might even go or with their mouth, because they have a big old head. They could probably make some big old noises. But gosh, they have really big hands. And I have 3 reports of them clapping. Something to think about. I want to show you the nails right there. They have all the same sort of things we have. They don't have claws, they have nails. The phalanges stick out. The interesting thing about the phalanges, you can see the shape of them. Phalanges are a fancy name for fingers, by the way. But you know, I don't talk down to you. If you don't know the word phalanges, then I get to teach you something, and I'm a teacher and I like that. There's nothing wrong with learning, right? Well, the tips of this finger here is that one there. It's a different angle. This is interesting because you can see the segments of the phalanges. It's kind of cool. Look at the fingers there, they're kind of cool. This is particularly interesting. It's a little hard to see, but here you can see 1 segment, 2 segments, and 3 segments before it joins the rest of the palm. That's because all of your fingers, except for your thumb, have 3 segments in them. Your thumb has 2, and that is evident in that thumb. Here's a side profile. 1 segment, 2 segments. So all the anatomy is there, it's consistent. There's more, it's showing you 3 segments of the fingers. All the anatomy that we have is there, including skin detail. We come back to this weird looking print. A guy named Brian Woods was following up on a sighting report. He fell down into the river, like at this really steep ledge. And so he says, well, I'm down here. That's a gnarly ledge, it's muddy, it's crappy, I'm already wet, I'm gonna stay down here. And he starts walking the creek, and about a half mile away from where the sighting actually happened, he's walking and he sees this in the ground. And he looks and goes, wow, what is that, an alligator print? I mean, I'm in Missouri, alligators do range this far north. But he started looking more, those aren't just 3 fingers, there's actually another one in there, and another one right here. There were 5 digits, and he goes, oh my gosh, this might be a handprint. You can see how wet and muddy this is. So actually, there's quite a bit of water striations on it. And when we looked really, really closely, fingerprints. The only animals that have dermatoglyphics, fingerprints, dermatoglyphics, are primates, like you and me and Bigfoot, and gorillas, and other things that we're related to. And if you look close, yeah, so there's about, see these like little gray areas all over the cast? He gave this cast to a police officer friend of his that works in forensics and is an expert on fingerprints. And that guy took these fingerprint cards of that dermatoglyphic patch in various spots. Hard to see, but they're there, you gotta believe me on that. This is the way cops document it, because a cop documented this. Like where they found it, the date they did it, all that sort of stuff. And the result was, and of course, this cop knows Brian, he knows what he's up to. He goes, yeah, those are dermatoglyphics all right. I don't want to know why they're so big. But this is the only example of that I'm aware of. Pretty cool. And by the way, for whatever it's worth, the fingers look pretty skinny, but you see these lines right there? There's a line, there's a line, there's a line, there's a line too. It's super saturated soil. Think about if you have really, really, really wet mud and you put your hand brief, like not so heavily into it, but just on top, push down maybe 1/4 of an inch and pull up, the water will flow back into the impression you made and make little like rivers, like rivulets, if you want to call them riverets, or I don't know, you know what I'm talking about. And that's what these are. You can see how wide the fingers really were right there. You can also see 1, 2, 3 segments, except for here on the thumb. 1, 2. Pretty cool. But again, if somebody wasn't here explaining all this to you, you'd probably just go, that looks like a mess. But you dig a little bit deeper, and the evidence is rich. Think about, what are you looking at there? Knuckles in the snow. This one's flipping you off, in fact. That's a middle finger. Thumb, it's not pressed directly in there. It's actually going down like at this angle, like that way into the ground. Look at these wrinkles that you have also on your knuckles. They're called flexion creases. Same hand, just 20 yards away. There were also footprints associated with this hand cast. I showed one of them last night in the snow. But here, by the way, I put this into Photoshop. I increased the contrast and the brightness and stuff because I wanted to bring out the lines in the hands, the flexion creases in the palms. Because you also have flexion creases in your palm, and you have those creases at a place that show how you bend your hands. If you look at your palm and bend any of your fingers inward, you'll see lines appear. That's what these are. They show how we use our hands. This is the only case with this much detail anywhere in the data set. And we have 2 examples from the same hand. That is amazing. We can look at the differences. We can see, look at these little pads right here, kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4 right there. And look, there's a line going across right there. There's a line going across right here as well. We have some of those pads. That's a very special feature called a simian crease. Humans don't have that. That line does not exist on your hand. But although there's a very small percentage, something like 7% of the population does have that. They call it simian hand or ape hand. You know, sometimes humans get it for weird reasons, genetic reasons. This guy has it. I also think it's interesting that, okay, we have a big patch here. Like this looks like one big groove, but over here it looks like 2. But I see these. That might indicate that the Sasquatch hand bends here more than here, which is interesting because that's also where chimpanzee hands have a crease and gorilla hands have a crease because they pick up objects like BBs off of a table, not with their thumb. Well, sometimes they do, but usually not. It's usually between the middle finger and one of the adjacent fingers. I'm just getting into this. I'm learning a lot about flexion creases. I think that these 2 photographs are going to teach us a lot about how Sasquatches use their hands. And just as a comparison here, human, you see the flexion creases. Gorilla, check out the flexion creases. Sasquatch, check out the flexion creases. A lot of similarities, but I'm more interested in the differences. Got a lot of learning to do, and hopefully a lot of teaching as I do it. And that kind of brings me to the end of it all. As I learn things, I will be posting them on my website. I will be doing gigs like this and happily teaching whatever I think I've learned to people who are interested like yourself. TV may not be that medium because, again, television is shallow and superficial. We just don't have the time to go in depth. We could do a whole show on this. But you guys care more than the American audience in general, and I want to thank you for that. Please learn as much as you can about Sasquatches, and by all means, give them the respect they deserve. Thank you, guys.
Barackman, right here, keep it going. be awesome.